Hi, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
And I'm Vladimir Jita. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's begin this hour with a major diplomatic breakthrough between North and South Korea. In a rare move, Kim Jong Un met with South Korean delegates in Pyongyang.
The South says Kim would possibly be willing to surrender his nuclear weapons if certain conditions are met. He also agreed to stop nuclear missile tests if the U.S. holds talks with his regime. Ben Tracy is following the latest in Beijing.
These are really extraordinary developments with North Korea. The regime is now apparently saying that it will not use nuclear or conventional weapons on South Korea, and then it doesn't even have to have nuclear weapons at all if it is given a security guarantee, although it's not entirely clear what that means. Now, all of this comes after a meeting with Kim Jong Un and South Korea's delegation in Pyongyang on Monday. Their dinner together included Kim Jong Un's wife and is said to have lasted for more than 4 hours. Now, North Korean state media says that Kim hopes to, quote, write a new history of national reunification. Now, all of this could complicate the Trump administration's strategy of isolating North Korea with sanctions. The U.S. says it is open to diplomacy, but only if North Korea abandon its nuclear weapons program. Now, the head of South Korea's National Intelligence Service was part of that delegation to North Korea, and he could now give U.S. officials a good read on Kim Jong Un's state of mind and if these promises are to be believed. Vlad and Anne-Marie.
All right, Ben Tracy, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
For more on this, we want to bring in CBS News senior global affairs contributor and Eurasia Group president, Ian Bremmer. Thank you so much for joining us, Ian.
Guys. Good to be back.
Okay, so let us talk about the significance of these talks and the outcome, what we're hearing. It's stunning.
It's good that they are prepared to talk. I am very skeptical that the North Koreans would actually be prepared to concretely give away their nuclear deterrent.
Right.
Whatever they say, I don't buy it.
Really?
But that doesn't mean that we don't want to have talks with them. And by the way, the Trump administration deserves credit for forcing the Chinese into tougher sanctions, which in turn made the North Koreans recognize they need to reach out, both to South Korea and to the U.S. Now, the Trump administration doesn't have much diplomatic capability to actually execute on effective negotiations if they are to start. But the South Koreans and the Chinese are very interested in that. And I think we could move to a deal that the Chinese have been floating for some time called a freeze for freeze, where the South Koreans say we're going to hold off on military exercises with the Americans for a while, and the North Koreans say we're going to hold off on tests of ICBMs and nuclear weapons for a while. I think that combined with some more diplomacy would be very welcome.
Yeah.
It would be a plus.
Why do you think that they are choosing this moment in time to announce this when in the past they've been very clear that they're not giving up their nuclear weapons program, the North Koreans?
I think they got a lot of wind in their sails from the back and forth over the Olympics. The Americans weren't really a part of it. Vice President Pence very notably said, I'm not going to engage with these guys. Ivanka was there, but it didn't really matter.
Right.
So I think they saw we can work directly with the South Koreans. That went much better than they expected. They then invited the South Koreans to come to Pyongyang. We've had a successful trip there. Kim Jong Un directly with the dinner. I mean, I think they see that at least some overtures, and they haven't had to actually give anything yet.
Right.
They've just held off on further tests, but they haven't given anything. I think actually it makes a lot of sense.
So when you say that the Trump administration deserves some credit, is it because the president's belligerence and some of the comments that he's made has pushed the North Koreans to say, let me throw our lot in with the South Koreans? Or is it the other way around, which is, look, the Trump administration is clearly being belligerent. I'd rather make a deal with my neighbors next door. Yeah, right across the border. Forget the United States. Let's just deal with the South Koreans and perhaps China.
Look, I mean, the most important actor in all of this is China. And I mean, the fact is that under Bush and under Obama, the Chinese, who are responsible for the overwhelming majority of North Korea's economy, was largely indifferent to American pressure. When Trump came in and the Trump administration not only focusing on this seriously, but talking about linking the North Korea issue to trade with China, and also saying, if you guys don't move on this, we will consider preemptive military attack. All of that convinced the Chinese to move towards unprecedented levels of sanctions at the United Nations Security Council, cutting off smuggling, also getting rid of a bunch of joint ventures between the Chinese and North Koreans. That really stung. And so the fact that the North Koreans suddenly had to deal with China that was acting in a much more hostile way towards their regime, and that happened because of Trump, that I think moved all of this in place. So again, I'm more than willing to criticize the Trump administration on the many, many issues in foreign policy that they've made all sorts of mistakes on, the Paris Accord and the Jerusalem decision and pulling out of TPP. But on North Korea, there's no question that Trump has moved the needle from Beijing and therefore now from Pyongyang in a way that neither of the previous administrations, Democratic
he deserves credit.
Do.
And I actually, when I say belligerence, I don't mean in a negative way. I mean the fact that the president has been very clear.
Way.
Yes, exactly. He's been very clear that how the United States feels and stands on the issue of the North Koreans and their nuclear weapons. And we should never forget that Kim Jong Un is a madman who reportedly had family member executed with an anti-aircraft weapon, right? So
I think it's not necessarily good to buy into the madman theory. I think that the North Korean regime is in the most challenging position, totalitarian state, because they kind of have to be, right? Massively brutal. There's no question that Kim Jong Un, who was there and ordered the execution of his own uncle and his family, and he watched that happen, and I mean, so definitely is willing to not only tolerate but directly, personally support violence. But if you look at the way he has articulated his power, his diplomacy around the world with the United States, with the Chinese, this strikes me as a rational person, not a madman. And in fact, I mean, you know, I would say that the more inconsistent policies have probably come from Trump, not from Kim Jong Un. Kim Jong Un is in a much more challenging position. Right?
Let's switch gears a little bit. Let us talk about the tariffs that the president has promised on imported steel and aluminum. Critics say this is going to start a trade war. Donald Trump says, what's wrong with a trade war? That's not necessarily a bad thing. Are critics being alarmist? Will it start a trade war?
I don't think it'll start a trade war, but I also think that Trump has really not been listening to experts around him. Trump likes to consume a lot of information, but he really only likes that information when it validates his pre-existing beliefs. In this case, all the experts around Trump, including very much in the White House, have been telling him this is a bad idea. You know, like, you're not going to help American industry. You're actually going to lose more jobs in manufacturing with imported steel than you're going to gain from the steel from the aluminum industry. You're not really hitting the Chinese. You're actually hitting allies more. Don't do it. And it's very hard when Trump has come out very publicly and said 25% on steel, 10% on aluminum, and we're doing this next week. It's hard for him to back off, but there's been a lot of news since then, including the North Korean issue we just talked about, and I actually expect that the final outcome that we see is going to be a little watered down from what Trump initially was saying on this issue. You've got Paul Ryan, you've got all the industry, you've got Gary Cohn, you've got the red state governors and mayors, GOP leadership in Congress. Almost all of them are telling Trump, we don't like this. The Wall Street Journal coming out this weekend saying by far the most significant mistake that Trump would have made since he's president. So, you know, his support group is not there.
But listen, he sat at that table surrounded by executives, steel executives, who applauded that decision. Clearly there is a group of people who think it's a good idea. What are they thinking that no one else is understanding?
The steel industry?
Yeah.
It's free money. I mean, that's not hard.
But the argument is once the dominoes start to fall, and it will end up with more expensive cars, and then people won't buy cars, so ultimately the steel industry will be sort of decimated because of it.
Yeah,
but they obviously don't buy that.
I don't think they'll be decimated. Again, I think the actual numbers we're talking about are comparatively small, and Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross is correct in that even if they go ahead with the maximalist numbers they're talking about, the amount of pushback we'll get from Europeans and Canadians, we can live with this, right? So it's not a disaster. The reason it's stupid is because Trump has taken a bunch of steps to alienate American allies, right? And that's not helping us to fight with the Chinese. If he puts this in place, the reaction will be that the Chinese, together with American allies, will cooperate in bringing cases against the United States in the WTO. Like, we should not want policies that facilitate the Chinese and American allies getting together.
Right.
That's a bad idea.
Right.
That's why we should have joined the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because it would have brought our allies together with us, and the Chinese would have been out. Instead, everything Trump does, whether it's leaving Paris or talking about steel and aluminum, are actually unifying the rest of the world against the United States. And America First should not be America alone. There is utility in America First policy if it's strategic and it leads by example. But Trump's foreign policy on America First largely has done neither of those two things.
We were talking earlier, could this also just be, we've talked about China, but could this be just a negotiating tactic with NAFTA? He's talked about NAFTA on the campaign trail. He's now saying that, he wants to renegotiate NAFTA. He's been saying that for quite some time, but in the context of this new idea around tariffs.
I think the NAFTA thing was one way of him trying to back away from the numbers on steel and aluminum by saying, well, okay, but Mexico and Canada, you fix NAFTA, it's not going to apply to you.
Right.
The problem on NAFTA is that, again, the politics are not just in the United States. You have elections coming up in Mexico. It looks like Lopez Obrador is going to win. He's very anti-American. Trump making these statements really helps the anti-American candidate. Not a good thing from the American perspective.
All right. Ian Bremmer, always great to have you. Thanks very much.